Whether you're in frozen timber or a foggy southern swamp, cold messes with your gear, especially your rifle. Today we're going to show you how to fix that. So buckle up. Hi everybody, welcome to another thrilling episode of LocaCarnivore. Glad you could join us today. Well, as I record this, fall has already arrived. The autumnal equinox was just a few weeks ago, and already we've had our first frosts, and we have snow in the forecast for a few days from now, so it is on. And of course, this means you're going to go out and hunt in this kind of stuff. And I'll tell you what, nothing affects your gear like cold. In today's video, we're going to discuss how the cold and how bad weather, inclement weather, affects your rifle reliability, your optics, your ammunition, and also how to set up your things like your sling and stuff like that. Just little basic little tricks and stuff that most people don't think about till they're out there and they realize, oh, this isn't working. And now they got to put their head in gear and figure out how to fix that little problem when they've got bigger issues at hand. So stick with us all the way through the end of the video. We're going to show you good stuff from start to finish. Now, what happens when things get cold? Well, first of all, everything slows down. You slow down, your equipment slows down, everything goes into slow motion because everything is just running a little bit behind. Everything takes longer in the cold. Figure to get anywhere or to do anything, plan on about 3 times the amount of time that it would normally take you to do a given activity. So if it's going to take you, let's say it takes you half an hour to cover at a hunting pace to cover a couple miles or something, you're going to get maybe a third to a half of that distance in the same amount of time just because it's cold. And we get things like snow on the ground and traction issues, or, if it's raining, wet rocks and stuff like that, wet vegetation. Nothing slipperier than grass on a mountainside after a morning frost or after a rainstorm. If you've ever tumbled down a hill or really lost your footing and that kind of stuff, and if you have a lot of deadfall around, all the little twigs and stuff that are on the ground, those are, I call them roller bearings, because you get a little thin layer of snow on top of them or a fresh rain, and they're just slicker than deer guts on a front porch in November, I'll tell you what. First out of the gate, let's talk about how the cold affects your rifle. And what kind of rifles? Are there rifles that are better in cold weather than others? I mean, there are some possible things that you can do to mitigate the cold weather effects just simply by selecting a certain action type for your hunting gun. So the first thing that slows down in your rifle is the lubricant, i.e. the gun oil that you put in there. And this is a big deal. Think of this like you would your car engine, your truck engine. You wouldn't put super heavyweight oil, like a summer weight oil, in for the winter. Now, you folks that are in maybe Arizona or something, you don't have to think about these things. But the rest of us, well, that's if you're down in the Valley of the Sun in Phoenix. But you get up to Flagstaff or up around Lake Powell, someplace like that, it's a different world in the winter up there, isn't it? It's darn cold and there's snow and stuff. So this applies to you too. Don't think you're out of the woods on this, so to speak. Now, lubricant's going to slow down. We need to lubricate our rifles with something that will continue to flow and have good, what they call viscosity, at these lower temperatures. So when you're selecting a gun lubricant, and I'm not going to name any significant brands here or anything like that, mainly because most of the stuff that's out on the market, all the manufacturers, they have all their different claims that this is good for this and this is good for that. And frankly, if I haven't personally tested it in the field over time, and I'm not talking just taking it on a day hunt like some of these, people in the mainstream gun media do, like they do one hunt or something and they write an article or make a video about it. No, I've got to use it for like a whole season or maybe a couple seasons before I'm going to tell you what I think of it. But what it's going to be up to you is to do your due diligence and investigate whatever lubricant you're currently using or what you think you're going to use and look at it for its low temperature limits and things like that. Now, I will mention one lubricant that is designed and is proven in severe cold conditions, and that's the lubricant that the U.S. Armed Forces issues. And in their infinite wisdom, they use military jargon. They call it lubricant Arctic weapon. This stuff's pretty cool. You can pour it. It's liquid and flowing liquid at minus 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That is just stunning. I mean, you figure like synthetic motor oil, it starts to lose its viscosity at about minus 40. So this stuff will go to minus 75. I mean, it'll take care of just about any situation. It is also designed to, condition the parts in the weapon and to not cook off fast under rapid fire. Now, there are a few guns in the inventory like the Ma Deuce or something. This is not used for that. Those have different requirements. But now, can you get a hold of this stuff? Yeah, it's out there. You got to look around. I'm not plugging it necessarily, but it sounds like a really interesting product. I personally have not used it yet, and frankly, I think I do need to go out and find some and give it a try. If I do, I'll make another video after I've used it for at least a season, and I'll tell you what I think about it, assuming the temperatures were cold enough. Lately around these parts, we haven't been getting nearly as cold as we used to, but sometimes we do get a good cold snap, so I'll try to test it for you. This is available at certain surplus retailers and stuff like that. You're just going to have to go out and search. Some of the bigger ones tend to have it, but it can be hit or miss. If you find some, I would get it and give it a try, frankly. It sounds very interesting. Like I said, I plan to give it a try. You know, don't take things at face value. Dig down, do your research, find out people that maybe have had problems with whatever you're thinking of using, and research that as well. Don't just go with the marketing hype that the company is feeding you, because they want you to buy the product, right? Go look it up and see if anybody's had any problems with it. You know, does it gum up a lot? Does it attract carbon and hold carbon? Does it hold dust? That's another big thing. Now, in general terms, how should we lubricate our hunting rifle for the cold? Well, frankly, I would say go sparing with your lubrication. Just put it at the major friction points, and the manufacturer of the gun in their owner's manual generally will tell you where to put the lubrication. Don't go crazy on this stuff. You don't want the things just running out and dripping out, frankly. For one thing, it attracts dust and things like that, and it can also hold carbon and stuff from the firing process. So depending on the type of action you have, etc., you might want to consider that. But go sparing on this, just enough to make sure that the gun runs pretty well. And the big thing, in my opinion, is keeping the action clean to begin with. Keep stuff out of the action. Now, what if you get snow or a lot of water in there or something and it freezes up? What are you going to do? Well, first of all, action type makes a big difference here, in my opinion. Bolt actions, in my opinion, are superior in cold weather, and that's because you get mechanical leverage with that bolt. When you push that bolt handle up, you get that mechanical leverage. And also you're using a twisting motion instead of just trying to bring the thing straight back. You're using a twisting motion which will break things loose. It's kind of like if you rock your skates back and forth, you rock a sled runner back and forth when it's frozen to the ground. Some of you in Florida don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Just trust me, this happens. This is a thing up here, okay? At any rate, it's the same principle. You're using a rotational motion as opposed to a straight back and forth motion, which will tend to break that stuff out, and then you can bring the bolt back. Now, if you run a semi-automatic or a lever gun or something like that, a lever action that has the ejection port on the side of the gun receiver is going to be a lot better off than like an old Winchester 94 or something like that that has the ejection port on the top. There again, you've got to protect that ejection area and keep stuff out of there as best as you can. But that side port is really going to help keep stuff from getting straight down into the gun. Now, if you have a semi-automatic, frankly, the ARs are fantastic for this sort of thing. And now you AK people, just shut up. Yeah, I know the AK is designed to run in Siberia in the middle of December. That's fine, and it's a good gun. But the AR is a really nice platform because as long as you keep that dust cover on the receiver closed until you're ready to shoot, and it opens up automatically when you fire, you know that. Keep that dust cover closed, almost everything will stay out of that action, and you're not going to have to worry about it. That thing will most likely run as long as you have a proper lubricant for the temperature range that you're using the gun in. So think ahead. Ask yourself, look at the action of your gun and say, if this thing was straight up and down, like on my shoulder, or if it's level, like I got it on my shooting sticks or something, or on my bipod or whatever, what is the impingement factor? What can get in there? How easy is it for stuff to get in there? Now, the nice thing is, if you're running a scope on top of your bolt gun, for instance, that scope does an amazing job at keeping stuff that's falling straight down like snow or rain out of the action. It does a very good job. I've been amazed at how even significant snowstorms, that scope will catch a lot of that stuff, and then it'll keep it out of the action. So just keep that action clean. If you have to, take your finger and take the snow out of the side of the bolt before you operate it. Why? When you rotate that bolt, you're going to push some of that stuff around and down into your magazine. Why do that, right? So keep in mind, think about, is my action clear? Is my gun clean and free of debris and free of precipitation? Just think it through and then act accordingly. And that's, again, why things take longer in the cold. You have to think ahead. You have to be 3 steps ahead of the environment because you know it's going to push you 2 back. Hey, let's talk optics in the cold here. What sorts of hazards, what sorts of problems do your optics face in the cold? Well, first of all, the biggest thing in my opinion is frosting or fogging over. Now, most scopes nowadays, a quality scope is going to be O-ringed and pressurized inside, usually with nitrogen, dry nitrogen, which pretty much eliminates internal fogging, except maybe in the most extreme situations. But for the most part, any quality scope is not going to fog internally. So what we're mainly concerned is the outsides of the lenses. Are those going to fog up? And there are several things that you can do to prevent that. First of all, there are a number of treatments that you can put on the glass. Now, a lot of the glass now from the quality manufacturers, they already have anti-fogging, anti-frosting coating on them, so that does help. But there are further things that you can do to mitigate that, and you can pre-treat those lenses. Another big thing you can do is keep caps on the ends of the scope on both lenses, the objective and the ocular. And the flip-up type are nice, but just keep them covered until you absolutely have to use this thing to look through it on a game animal, and then you can uncover it. The other thing you can do is think about temperature consistency. If you go from a super warm truck cab and you yank that gun out and it's 10 below outside, that's going to be a shock cooling. That's going to be a shock freeze to that. And if there's any moisture, and there will be moisture because there's always ambient humidity, relative humidity, there's always moisture in the air. Even in arid climates like the Colorado high country, there's still moisture. And anything that's on that lens, even if it's under a cap, will suddenly condense onto the glass because the glass gets cold real quick. Or the moisture suspended in the outside air outside the truck, it's already super cooled and it's just looking for places to cling. So basically, if you look out and you can see frost or you can see dew hanging on things, keep in mind, as soon as you pull that gun out and that scope out from the warm truck into the cold environment, you're going to get the fogging. So you need to be cautious and look at your lenses. Also, don't breathe at your lenses, especially when you bring the gun up to your shoulder. Make sure that you're breathing carefully through your nose and not exhaling significantly through your mouth. A lot of breathing control has to happen here because that'll drift up. It's warm as it comes out of your mouth, out of your body. That moisture is warm and it's going to drift up and it's going to start expanding out and it's going to move with any wind or whatever, breeze. And as soon as it contacts a cold surface, i.e. the lens of your scope, that ocular sitting back there in front of your eye, that's going to condense. And it's either, at the least, it's going to be a kind of a foggy thing, or it's going to go dew, or the worst, it'll be frost or even ice. That's really a difficult situation. You're not going to see through frost or ice very well. You might be able to get around a few droplets here and there, but ice and frost, you are basically done until you can clean that off. So consider storing your guns in a cooler section of your vehicle. Like if you have an SUV or something like that, keep them way in the back where it's cooler. The heat's not getting back there from the heater. Don't run the heat super hot. Keep the truck relatively cool, just as cool as you can stand it, so that it reduces that what they call a delta T in engineering, that change in temperature, that difference in temperature. That way you'll have less of a shock cooling effect. Also keep in mind, if the gun has been super cooled and cold soaked during the day, and you then put it into a warm truck, or you go into a warm cabin or a warm tent or something like that, you're going to have a similar problem. You're going to get condensation, very quick condensation on everything, the gun, all that. And all that moisture was on there is going to condense on it very quickly before it warms up and then evaporates off. So if you're going in just for a minute into the tent to get some equipment and then you're coming back out, don't take the gun with you. Store it safely at the outside of the tent so it stays at that consistent temperature. Just a handy tip. Now the other thing that's going to affect those optics in cold weather is turrets. And if you've got the dial-a-prayer wheels on the top, you know what I'm talking about, where you can dial your drop and you can dial your windage and all that sort of stuff. Those are, in my opinion, those are just asking for getting snow in them or something like that. So you want to make sure that those turrets are covered up until you're really ready to use them. Also keep in mind that they might get a little bindy. It just depends. You need to take these things that you're going to use, that you're going to depend on, that are mechanical. You need to take them out in the cold before your tag is on the line, before getting your game is on the line. Take them out on a cold day before season if you can, and see how they operate. Cold soak that thing. Leave it in a controlled environment where it's secure, but that it can cold soak, and then take it out and safely test the turrets and make sure they're going to move and do everything you need them to do. Something to think about, especially in this day and age. If everybody's got to have a tactical scope with the big dial of prayer wheels on the top and on the side, jutting out there. Now, if you've got regular cap turrets and you're already zeroed and set, shouldn't be a problem for you. However, as that stuff gets cold and severe cold, like below 40 degrees, all the metal in there, like the little springs and everything that are holding the reticle in place and holding your zero, those are going to change dimensionally. They're going to contract, and so that might change your zero potentially, especially if the scope is not a high quality unit. Which goes to show you should buy a good quality scope. By the way, I did a video not too long ago about optics and how to pick a good scope in 3 different price categories. I'll put the link down in the description there. You can go watch that video. I think you'll find that fun and interesting. Bottom line though, that cold is going to affect things. So you might want to go out and check the zero on your scope when it's a cold day. If you have the chance before the season starts and you've got a really cold day out, go check. Make sure the thing's still holding zero. Just something you never know. You never know what's going to happen. How does cold affect your ammunition? Well, it affects it in multiple ways. First of all, like we talked about, that shock cooling effect with your optics, where the ambient moisture will suddenly collect and condense and possibly freeze onto a surface that's brought into a cold environment suddenly. Same thing's going to happen with your ammo. So as you take that warm gun out of that warm truck or that warm tent and go into a cold environment, all the moisture that's around that gun, inside the barrel, on the receiver, on the optics, and on the ammunition is going to condense and potentially freeze. That could potentially give you a problem, especially when it comes to feeding, as far as feeding and cycling the weapon. That could become a problem. Also, that cold, as that moisture condenses, if the primers are not sealed, like if you load your own ammo, you should be sealing your primers after you're done. And also make sure that your crimp is very good, because you don't want any of that moisture just slowly sneaking in and ruining your primer, ruining your powder from either direction. So you want to make sure that that's the thing. Now, it might even be, you might want to take your ammo out and brush it off and make sure you wipe it down before you put it into the gun. Make sure everything's at the same temperature. And also check your magazine spring before you start putting the ammo into the magazine. Take your finger, push the follower down a little bit, make sure it feels good and smooth and it's not binding up or anything. Then you can load up. And just kind of keep an eye on things. If you get moisture, heavy moisture like snow or rain or something, into the action of the gun and into the magazine especially, at the end of the day, it's your first opportunity when you get it out of that environment. You need to clean the ammunition off very thoroughly, and you should maybe consider disassembling and cleaning the magazine, making sure that that's completely free of moisture and whatnot, so it's not going to build any rust, and lubricate it according to the manufacturer, whoever made the magazine, what they recommend. Now, the other effect the cold is going to have on your ammunition is your velocity is going to drop. Even with a high quality, relatively temperature stable powder, you're still going to get a reduction in velocity because it's just not going to burn as well in the cold. So you're not going to get the energy out of the propellant. So you have to calculate what your drop is going to be in that temperature. Now, there are ways to calculate that. You can get an idea from, if you should talk to the manufacturer of either the ammunition or the powder and find out what the temperature range is, like how many feet per second on average you can expect up or down, plus or minus, per every like 10 degrees of temperature or every 20 degrees, whatever it might be. And they have this data because they test this all the time. So then you can calculate what your probable velocity is going to be. Best thing, of course, take that ammunition out in the temperatures you plan to hunt in and shoot it and see what happens. How far of a drop do you get? Instead of, hitting your zero, is it now hitting 2 inches low or whatever it might be? That's the best way, but the second best way, again, is to find out what the temperature variation for that particular load is from the manufacturer, and then just at least apply that into a ballistics calculator so they have a pretty good idea what the effect is going to be. Now let's talk about something really simple that a lot of people don't even think about when it comes to hunting in the cold, and that's your sling, that thing that you're holding the rifle off your shoulder on. Different materials react differently in the cold. Nylon reacts differently from canvas web, reacts differently from leather. And if it gets wet and cold, it can react differently. You have different stretch rates for each of these materials depending on the environment. So you might want to think about selecting a sling that is very impervious to these. I would suggest going with web nylon that is a good specification. A mil-spec web nylon would be best, because that's going to be proven to work at various temperature ranges. I would suggest staying away from a leather sling in severe cold or severe wet conditions, because that leather, as soon as it gets super cold, it's going to contract, it's going to get very brittle and stiff. The other thing is, if it gets really wet, it will stretch, and then it'll take a new set once it dries, because it'll try to shrink back up. So you're going to get a lot of dimensional dynamics here, depending on how wet it is and how cold it is for the leather. So I would really stay away from the leather slings in severe environments, in my opinion. So I would go again with a good web nylon, and then if you want a nylon, a pad, neoprene type pad or something to keep it from sliding around, not a bad idea, especially if you're out in the rain, because if you got some of these newer high-tech rain gears and stuff that I've seen that are really super smooth and slick, boy, if you have just like a straight nylon sling or even a leather sling, that could start slipping and sliding off your shoulder a lot. Boy, nothing more annoying than a rifle that just has a life of its own and just keeps wanting to slide off. You're constantly having to babysit that thing and hang on to it and do all sorts, and it takes your mind off your business. It takes your mind off looking out for those animals and making sure you're safe and just keeping a hold of the situation. So you don't want stupid, simple things like that to get in your way. So select your sling properly, and also be ready to adjust it. If you can have a quick adjust system, or maybe two different slings, one for warm weather and one for cold weather, that you just have quick disconnect sling swivels, that's another good way to go. Because let's think about this. You set up your sling when you're out there, in the gun store, or when you're out on the range like in August or something, and zeroing the rifle, or in early September. And now it's November and it's 40, 50 degrees colder. You're wearing a whole bunch of clothing now. You got all sorts of stuff on. You're a lot bigger and puffier and all this sort of groovy stuff. So that sling may not fit correctly, or you might have to have a different length of sling. So if you can adjust it quickly, that's a great thing. Or just simply test this out ahead of time, see where it has to be adjusted for cold weather versus warm, a lot of clothes versus not a lot of clothes, and then just have two different slings that you change out with some QD swivels. That would be a good option too. One other thing that a lot of people don't put any thought into as far as cold weather and their rifle, and that is how all the extra clothing you're going to be wearing when it's super cold out is going to affect what's called the length of pull, i.e. the distance from your shoulder to the trigger on the gun, which then influences the distance from your noggin, from your eyeball, to your scope, to the ocular on the scope, right? So if you set up your scope and all that stuff when you were wearing a t-shirt in the summer, or when you bought the scope in the spring or the summer and you had it, and it's just great. Now you put a whole bunch of layers on, and that scope, that whole rifle has moved out, say, a half inch even, or even maybe close to an inch away from your face. Now what are you going to do? Is it set up? So when you're setting up your scopes and mounting your scopes, do it by putting on some of your heavy gear and get an idea of where that's going to end up. And then you're going to have to maybe find a compromise spot between, if you hunt with that gun in warm weather and cold weather, you're going to have to find a compromise to where you just have to maybe do a little head adjustment or something like that, depending on what clothing you have on. Or you might have a warm weather gun and a cold weather gun. That would be optimal, to where it's set up for heavy clothing versus not heavy clothing. Plus, take all your gear out, put all your gloves on and all this sort of stuff, and make sure you can, practice a little bit, manipulating the rifle, loading it, adjusting the scope if you've got a variable power, doing the turrets, whatever it might be, getting all your stuff out of your pockets, getting your binos up. Can you do all this with these heavy gloves on? When you're Biff the Michelin Man in your big parka and stuff like that, how does that affect you getting your rifle down, your sling, your slung rifle off your shoulder and up to your shoulder to fire it? There's a whole bunch of things that just happen that you don't think about until you're right there. And then it gums you up because, well, you've got just a really narrow window. Those animals aren't going to wait forever. And you don't have time to have some stupid little thing that you hadn't worked through ahead of time get in your way and take away your attention, or just completely blow your hunt. So just plan ahead and practice with your gear. Hey, what's your go-to cold weather setup for hunting? How do you lube your gun? What are you using? How do you protect your optics? How do you protect your ammo? All this sort of stuff. Any little tricks of the trade, stuff you've learned after years of hunting in the cold that, hey, if you just do this little thing, it makes it so much easier, stuff like that. Go down in the comments, share that with us. We'd love to hear from you. Well, what did we learn today? Well, we learned that cold weather doesn't care where you're hunting. If it's cold out, it's going to mess with you and mess with your gear. So you've got to plan this out. You've got to have the right rifle set up. You've got to have it lubricated correctly. You've got to understand the effects on your ammunition and all that stuff. You've got to have your optics scienced out so that they're not affected, or have a way to deal with them if they do get affected by the cold. And you've got to have your gear all figured out, your clothing, all that sort of stuff. Have it all figured out. You've practiced in it. You understand how to do it. You've drilled and drilled, so it's all intuitive. It just all happens for you. You don't have to put a lot of conscious thought into it. Hey, thank you for spending your valuable time with us at the LocaCarnivore today. Really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you got some useful information out of it. And remember, always insist upon facts. And there's one fact that I always insist upon. Han shot first. Thanks for watching.